and she didn't see a lot of dead animals laying down there waiting to become fossils. Uh, saw some live live fish, but the floor eh, wasn't anything. So y'all had some fish, didn't you? In the aquarium, didn't you? One time? You don't remember? Do you? Yeah. Did any of them die? What happened to them when they died? They floated to the bottom, right? They floated at the top. Um, so again, kind of the story they give you about how something becomes a fossil. This is from science. This is elementary. Uh, Science World is for those who are older. If you remember Weekly Reader, this is kind of the modern Weekly Reader. And again, it tells how fossil is formed. This one does do it on land, which seems to be, clear, a little more accurate, I think, than the other one. But uh, all of us have seen roadkill, right? And you drive by, maybe a week later, there's the scavengers, and a couple of more weeks, and there's hardly anything left. And we realize that's probably not going to become a fossil, is it? Uh, so let's think about the fact that fossils, really, to become a fossil, there needs to be rapid burial. It's not something that's, again, going to die and lay out there on the road and eventually turn into a rock or a fossil. Um, so let's look at some examples that really show this fact of rapid burial. This particular article talks about they actually find 3 fossils in one. It was a case where one of the flying reptiles was apparently skimming over the water and catching fish and eating those. And as he was flying low to the water, another fish jumped up and grabbed him. And so here are the creatures we're talking about. Uh, Again, this one was kind of flying over the water, catching fish maybe near the surface, or as they jumped up. This was the fish he had for lunch. And this actually is the footprint. Uh, here's this would be the front limb with kind of the what we call fingers, I guess. And as they stood, they kind of folded the wings and they made this impression. This is the back foot. So they like fish for lunch, and then this shield snout jumped up and grabbed the creature. And so here's the actual fossil. You got again the larger fish. You can see the reptile snout of it here, and then the meal. Get to kind of zoom in for that. Is here again, just swallowed it before it got. There's other fish in the stomach, so it was still in the esophagus. And get even closer, you can actually see the fin impression and the fish's vertebrae, spinal column. So think about that. Here's a flying reptile swooping down, catching lunch with fish coming up maybe or near the surface, and all of a sudden the larger fish grabs him and is going to have him for lunch, and then something occurred where all of that is fossilized. Now, how's that occur? Something happened quick, real quick, and sediment had to come in and cover them again quickly, so that they, again, would become the fossil. Here's another example. Two dinosaurs that were locked together in combat, fighting each other. And the article talks about that they were found in their natural positions. They had to be buried exceptionally quickly. See, again, to have that pose of fighting each other, again, that had to be rapid burial. And again, they're preserved in unconsolidated sandstone, which usually forms from sand with high water content. So kind of like what we talked about last week with the flood. This New Scientist article talks about something went terribly wrong as this ancient ichthyosaur was giving birth. She died along with her offspring. So here's the actual fossil. Here you can see the head of the baby coming out. And so here's kind of the drawing of what it was like. She'd already given birth to one. One was in the process, and there's another one again behind that one. But all that kind of frozen in time with, again, rapid burial. There's a fish eating lunch. Again, it was rapidly buried, became a fossil. A lot of the fossils you see, they kind of have a funny or unique pose to them. In this case, of this dinosaur, you can kind of see the neck curved back. Here's the Areoculus, the supposedly missing link between reptiles and birds. And you can see again how its neck is curved back. This horse found out in Wyoming, again, almost looks like it's in the rearing condition. Why these unique poses? There's actually a term they use for this, the death pose. It's, again, you think about what's occurring. And so you got this dinosaur running along, and here comes in a big wave, and it dumps a bunch of sand and sediment. It talks about sediments released, again, based on, of course, the weight. First, the larger gravels, then the sand, and finally the silts and clay. So, again, the wave comes in, dumps a bunch of sand. Here comes another big wave, dumps a bunch of sand, kind of moves the creature back a little bit. And here comes another big wave and dumps sand, again, bending the head back in that pose that we saw a while ago. And finally, it's completely covered. And so, again, they talk about the dinosaur death pose. They have a name for it. It's the death pose. And why has that occurred so many times? Why do you see that? And this writer says, although the roads to the death pose are many, immersion in water is the simplest explanation. And again, that's kind of what we would expect, of course, during the flood. With that rapid burial, we also have mass burial. With rapid burial, you see the detail. This leaf here, you can actually see. You can see it, but you actually see the veins there in the piece of leaf that we found out in Colorado. Everybody guess what this is? Shrimp. Again, look at the detail. See its eye, see the thin legs of the shrimp. So you see that detail there in fossils. And then, as we said, the mass burials, like at Dinosaur National Park, where this gallery is. And again, it's just a huge number. There's 1,200, 1,500 dinosaur bones, several different species here in this wall. And again, there's skulls, there's vertebrae, backbone, there's all kinds of leg bones, ribs, nearly everything you could think of, all in this mass wall. And they talk about that the work here has been biased towards large dinosaurs. I mean, it is Dinosaur National Park after all. But there are a number of small vertebrae in that big wall there that's there, including frogs, salamanders, mammals, lizards. And usually they're not mentioned in the brochure and the writings that advertise the site. But again, all that in kind of a mass burial there in northeastern Utah. Another one talks about bone beds always come with a mystery. Why did so many animals die at once? Floods and volcanoes are sometimes invoked. In this particular site, about a third the size of a tennis court, they found nearly 1,200 specimens, again, of different creatures that had been, again, buried quickly. And even to the point of dropping birds in their tracks. I mean, how do you fossilize a bird? You start walking up close to a bird, and they fly away. Not only birds, but bats. Actually, a pair of turtles caught in active copulation, as well as pregnant mares. And all here just buried together. Here's trilobites, that a bunch of those, I think it was 70, that were buried here together. 60. This is a snail-like type creature, again, all just kind of buried in one big mass. Ammonites together, crinoids. This is actually found out near Crawfordsville. So again, you have those mass buried. What's the explanation for those? And then probably the latest problem for the evolutionists is the fact of soft tissue being found in so many creatures. Again, this is kind of a little more recent. Because they think the fossils are so old, there was a time when they, of course, wouldn't even thought about looking for soft tissue. But here this article talks about the sea star's tube feet, and there's fossils, and the scientist here talks about how they're usually the first things that go. Don't make fossils. But again, that's what we're talking about. But there was, again, the tube feet that had been fossilized in that particular creature. Here's a salamander that so unique condition that you can see the lungs, the nerves, the gut, and even the last meal of the animal, which in this case was a frog. 125 million year old mammal fossil reveals the evolution of hair and spines. Here's hair being found in a fossil. It contains fur, hair, follicles, spines, organs, even a fungal skin infection being found in this particular creature. And yet it's 125 million years old. This is a case of green oil being found in a fossil bird. It says 48 million year old skin gland from a bird containing lipids used by the bird to preen its plumage, keep the feathers oiled. 48 million years old and still liquid. In this squid that was found, still had ink, uses as a defensive weapon. Scientists unearthed a fossilized squid, which was so well preserved that they were able to draw a picture of it using its own 150 million year old ink. really believe ink is going to hang around for 150 billion years old? What about dandruff? Dino-bird dandruff research head and shoulders above the rest. A little catchy title there. So here was 125 million year old dandruff that was preserved among the feathered dinosaur early birds, revealing the first evidence of how dinosaurs shed their skin. Dandruff, 125 million years old. Starch in plants. This one's supposed to be 280 million year old starch grains. And really all of this kind of started by accident when a lady by the name of Mary Schweitzer from North Carolina State University found what was collagen or blood-like material in a T-Rex bone. They found the fossils out in Montana, and for some reason, I forgot all the details, it was too big for them to transport out and had to break the bone. And when they did, she found something that, was kind of, I guess we'd say, gooey. And as they further researched it, they found that it was, again, hemoglobin type of product from this Tyrannosaurus rex in 6 independent lines of evidence. Now, she's been, of course, criticized a lot. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but she's continued, since found it one time, can I do it again? And so they found in an 80 million year old hadrosaur, again, still protein material, and this was sent to several institutions to have them check it, multiple institutions, independent analysis, and yeah, it's organic material that belonged to the dinosaur. And her conclusion was, it's still unknown is the chemistry behind such preservation. How in the world does this happen if it's millions of years old? Another scientist actually tried to, testing how could this happen, seeing what would be the limit of DNA and other collagen, which again is what she found. And depending on, of course, the temperature, obviously at 0 centigrade, freezing, it lasts a lot longer. But at 10 degrees, which is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, he found that it would last only 180,000 years. And yet this is supposed to be millions of years old. That hadrosaur, again, was found, Montana is cold, but the hadrosaur was found in Italy where, the temperature is more like 68, and in that case, it would only have lasted 15,000 years old. And so, we're getting back closer to the Bible timeline when we're talking about those particular dates. Again, she wrote an article here in Scientific American that she, for the past 20 years, I have been trying every experiment I can find to disprove the hypothesis that the materials my collaborators and I have discovered are components of soft tissue from dinosaurs and other long-gone animals. So she's trying to say, this can't be true, so let me try different ways to kind of disprove this. There was one scientist wrote her and said that it was not possible and that I could not convince him or her otherwise regardless of our data. So there are scientists who will just not accept this. It can't happen because of their belief regarding, again, millions of years. And so, again, she's still asking the question, why are these materials preserved when all of our models say they should be degraded? there was an article in Science last year that kind of talked about her work over the years. Again, she first found that first dinosaur in 97, so it's been several years. And what effect that's had on her and her work. And the article talks about how that she has had a storm of criticism that she's had to endure. Others were even harsher than that in what they had to say about her. She, in publishing this material, was really terrified because she knew what the results were going to be. She knew the criticism was going to come. And she also knew her funds were going to be probably taken away as well. And so that again, and yet science is supposed to be, not have any bias or anything like that. And that's just not the case. So let's go back and look at that fossil we started with. Dr. Miller was talking about Tiktaalik. Again, that's his chart. And so you had this missing gap here, and again, some scientists found Tiktaalik, and so that's that was the missing link, and so that answers the question, and that proves that they're right. I was looking around and found this particular item, and I did find that it came in different colors, different shapes, and kept looking, and lo and behold, found that apparently it evolved into this type of device or item. And again, you had different colors, a little different shape, a little different variety there. Here's one that's even rounder top to it, and again, coming in different sizes, some that are really, really tall there. And kept looking, and lo and behold, it must have evolved into another item that kind of apparently it split at the top, and so again, you had different colors and different shapes here that came along. And one day I was in Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I found the missing link between those two. So Dr. Miller talks about that he has these fossils, and so that means he win. And we have our plasticware, so we must win too, right? Well, what does that really prove? What? Just because he can find some similarity in creatures and put them together, that some lived way back in the past, we don't even know what the creature looked like, and yet all this is supposed to prove evolution. Well, since Dr. Miller presented that, here's Jonathan's textbook again. It uses this we just talked about as an example. It says it has the characteristics of both fish and four-legged animal, and the discoveries provide new fossil evidence to help scientists understand the relationship between marine vertebrates and land animals. But after that was found, a few years later, scientists found footprints of a four-legged land animal that was older than the Tiktaalik. So how can you have a four-legged creature that's older when this creature that Dr. Miller was talking about is supposedly the first, land animal, the missing link between the fish and the amphibian, four-legged creature? But we've got something now that's older than that, so that kind of removes it. And as they've done further study on the fossil, they've actually found that due to the great number of vertebrae, forelimbs, specialization, and so forth, that it's really not a four-legged creature after all. It's a fish. And again, it's been several years since I heard Dr. Miller, so I thought I'd go on his website and see. And he doesn't use that as an example. Still in the textbooks. And really that's a big problem, because a lot of what's in the textbooks really are outdated. And as we'll see from a quote from Stephen Gould, they don't get removed. And he complained about that fact. How many of you remember about the horse, evolution of the horse? And you've seen the little horse and the next size up and so forth. Jonathan's textbook had that example in it about the horse, and here was the picture. This is supposed to be, again, the ancestor to the horse, and this one's 35 million years ago, and then here's the horse today. Well, again, really the horse hasn't, by scientists, it's still in the textbooks. As I said, I'm surprised it was actually in Jonathan's textbook. But this article goes all the way back to 79, and it talks about how the record, even 120 years after Darwin, the record of evolution is still surprisingly jerky, and we even have fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. And it goes on to actually talk about the horse and that fact, and that it should be discarded or modified. Yeah, that was 79, and yet it's still in his textbook. Again, here's the quote I mentioned from Stephen Jay Gould. Again, he's bemoaning the fact that textbooks do have misinformation. They get in there and they kind of stay there. They're not correct. He talked about he'd written 2 essays about this fact. And still, the Don horse, the evolution of the horse, is still there. This article was about the fact that the horse exhibits are still in the museum, and they should be taken out because they're communicating outmoded knowledge. So again, it's not used by evidence anymore by the scientists. You can still find it, unfortunately, again, in the textbooks. Not evolutions today. Yeah, they just show pictures. And even evolutionists today won't show that because they know it's not true. The National Center of Science Education is the biggest organization in the country that fights creationism. And anytime a law is introduced in a state legislature, they're going to be there. So this, again, is coming from their website. She says it became clear that the evolution of horses was a bush made up of numerous branches, not a tree with one directional trunk. Some branches of the bush showed a general trend toward decreasing size, not increasing. And the horses with the 3 toes, again back there on that chart, they coexisted with the horses with 1 toe. So the 3-toe horse did evolve into the 1-toed horse. She wants to say, these justly criticized illustrations give the impression that through a series of progressive changes, horses evolved to the current perfected form. Not at all true. Yet there it is again in Jonathan's textbook from last year. So it is a problem. I remember the case in '68, I think it was, where we kind of overturned the law, like in Tennessee, that forbid teaching of evolution that was in involved in the Scopes trial back in 1925. And as it went before the Supreme Court, the lawyers there were kind of making their case. And one of the Supreme Court justices talked about, trying to side with evolution, talked about Neanderthal as, kind of a missing link type, again, a creature. And the lawyer at that time, again, had to correct him because that is no longer being used as an example. So, again, people that they're taught this in high school from the textbooks, they carry that idea with them, in this case, all of his life, apparently, an old Supreme Court judge. And yet it's been debunked, again, many, many years ago. So that's one of the problems with trying to have to correct things when, again, they get outdated like that. The case, the big example that's now in the better textbooks, I guess we'd say, is that of the evolution of the whale. And this is also in Jonathan's textbook last year. After 50 million years, whales evolved to become the giant marine mammals we recognize today. However, scientists have had difficulty finding the fossils of whales that show how this dramatic change occurred. These missing links could reveal how whales lost their legs. Now, several new discoveries are helping scientists fill in the blanks of the evolutionary history of whales. This particular journal says, here's how it all started. 55 million years ago, a furry hoofed mammal about the size of a dog ventured into the shallow, brackish remnant of the sea and set its descendants on a path that would lead to the complete abandonment of the land. These early ancestors of crustaceans, that's the dolphins, porpoises, and whales, thereafter set on an evolutionary course that is arguably the most unusual of any mammal that ever lived. So yeah, that's pretty unusual. National Geographic said that whales once were celebrated by creationists as the best evidence against evolution. Now may be evolutionists' most eloquent proof of evolution. And yet it went on to say whales were among a tiny handful of mammals to make an evolutionary U-turn, retrofitting their terrestrial body plan to sense, eat, move, and mate underwater. How whales accomplished such an enormous transformation has baffled even the greatest scientific intellects. Darwin actually kind of hinted at this in his Origin of Species. He said in North America, the black bear was seen by Hearn swimming for hours with widely open mouth, thus catching, like a whale, insects in the water. Even in so extreme a case as this, I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered by natural selection more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale. So, again, think about a bear and think about a whale. And there's a lot of differences, a lot of things that have to happen for that to occur. Then in 2015, a few years ago, it was decided, well, bears is not the creature that evolved into whales, it was cows. Cows was the relative on land, and the Wallaces are related to dogs. And so how many of you believe that I took this picture while we were in Alaska? But as we talked about last week, evolutionists, before studying DNA, had to make these diagrams or these pictures based upon physical similarity, what they could see, what they could observe. And seeing, some bones in a cow that maybe looked like a bone in a whale might lead you to that conclusion, or lead them to jump to that conclusion. But because now they study the similarities in DNA, that's changed a lot of these relationships that they talk about. And so today, the whale, his closest living relative is the hippopotamus, based upon, again, DNA similarities. And when you think about the whale, the porpoise or dolphin, any of those, and think about what had to change from a land animal to become, again, these sea creatures. And this article just mentions a few of those. There was the backward shift of the nostrils. And so here on the land animal, the nose is in the front, again, kind of like the cow or the hippopotamus. And that had to somehow, gradually move up to become a blowhole. That's just one change. The transformation of the forelimbs into flippers. So here's the four-legged animal with his legs and all the elbows and the different joints that would be characteristic of that, and that had to somehow evolve into a flat flipper that has very little movement in it. And then there's the tail. The tail of, again, either a cow or a hippopotamus or a four-legged creature is a long way from having the strength that a whale has in its tail. And it's actually not connected to the spinal cord like the other animals. And so there's, again, a fairly big change that had to take place. There was the loss of the hind limbs completely in the case of the whale. Loss of fur. There's a big difference. This article doesn't mention all the changes. Big difference in the hearing process underwater and hearing on land. There would be the pressure on the skin. A whale has more skin layers. There's the pressure of the water in the whale creatures. Then again, the air pressure that's on us here on land. So a lot of different changes take place there. But let me end with a couple quotes from Richard Dawkins, who obviously is no fan of creationism. He complains about the fossil record. He says, we don't need fossils in order to demonstrate that evolution is a fact. The evidence for evolution would be entirely secure, even if not a single corpse had ever fossilized. There are, of course, gaps, and creationists love them obsessively. So, instead of trying to talk about the fossil record, he said, well, let's just give it up. We don't need it. Yet there it is in the textbooks being used both as evidence for creation. He went on to say that Cambridge shows, that's the time period there, shows a substantial number of major animal phyla already in advanced state of evolution. The very first time they appear in the fossil record, it is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. And so Dawkins probably not a fan of fossil record. Any questions or closing remarks there? Oh yeah, everything. We're evolving. So who knows what we're going to turn out to be? We might return to the ocean one day. We'd actually be Aquaman. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, in fact, you can almost trace it back to the 60s. After, you remember when Russians launched Sputnik in '59, I think. We all were scared in America, and so we got in the space race. And it's actually Eisenhower before Kennedy wanted to fund science education even more. And so I forgot the exact, probably billions of dollars, were devoted to science education. And that really was all that the evolution needed at that time. That money was used to publish a whole new set of biology textbooks that heavily pushed evolution. You had the court cases in the early 60s, like 63, that ruled out Bible reading, ruled out prayer in the public schools. And so with the removal of that, with the greater emphasis on evolution, that even the evolutionists admit that was the turning point that kind of changed things in this country. All right, we'll stop there, and one more lesson next week. We want to talk about DNA. So bring your thinking caps.